can begin now.
I'm ready when you are, Paul. Just let me know when it is, when we're hooked up.
And I need to cross my mind.
We're glad to have y'all with us this evening. You folks that are at home and streaming, we're glad to have you live streaming. We're glad to have y'all with us as well. And it looks like a healthy group here this evening. And we're going to start out as we normally do with a...
I'm here.
Yeah, and James is here also.
You said healthy group.
So we're going to start out with a hymn as we normally do, and I think we're going to do number 133 at home. 130. Well, anyway, it's At the Cross. So, hit it.
We'll do the first, second, and fifth verse. First, second, and fifth.
Y'all sounded good.
You sounded loud.
I'll tell you, you folks at home sounded real good. You probably didn't know it, but we have a two-way feed here on the audio. We can hear you, just can't see you, but y'all sounded real good at home. Of course, I'm kidding. Or just flat out lying. But anyway, we're glad y'all are tuned in. We're glad you folks are here with us this evening. And so if you remember, well, turn to Joshua. Turn to the book of Joshua. We are into the second chapter. You remember that we started on the first chapter of Joshua last week. You will remember that we read the part where it says he told them to get their stuff ready. Within 3 days they were going to be crossing the Jordan River after these centuries, 7 to 8 centuries later, from the initial covenant with Abraham, then later with his son Isaac, then later with his son Jacob. And now finally they're going to get to cross. So we're going to start into chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is a short little chapter, 24 verses, but it's got some very important things in it. It's, one of the folks I was talking to earlier said that, yeah, he hated studying those chapters that weren't very important. So pardon me for saying that this one was very important. They're all important. So I have to really be careful what I say around this group. They're fast. They're quick. Like cats. Okay, so go to chapter 2, and we will start out there. Look, we're going to look at those first 7 verses and then talk about those a little bit. Let me read those. I'm reading for from the New English Translation. And so it starts out like this. I beg your pardon? Okay. Chapter 2, verse number 1. Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 spies out from Shittim secretly and instructed them, find out what you can about the land, especially Jericho. They stopped at the house of a prostitute named Rahab and spent the night there. The king of Jericho received this report. Note well, Israelite men have come here tonight to spy on the land. So the king of Jericho sent this order to Rahab. Turn over the men who came to you, the ones who came to your house, for they have come to spy on the whole land. But the woman hid the 2 men and replied, yes, these men were clients of mine, but I didn't know where they came from. When it was time to shut the city gate for the night, the men left. I don't know where they were heading. Chase after them quickly, for you have time to catch them. Now she had taken them up to the roof and had hidden them in the stalks of flax she had spread out on the roof. Verse 7. Meanwhile, the king's men tried to find them on the road to the Jordan River near the fords. The city gate was shut as soon as they set out in pursuit of them, so that they wouldn't be able to escape. They shut the city gates. So, if you remember back in Numbers chapter 13, some 40 years earlier than this, Moses sent out how many spies? 12. Yeah, he sent out 12 spies and told them to look over the land and instructed them to go basically sort of like from one end of the land to the other. And then you have Numbers 13 verses 1 through 5, I believe it is, or 21 through 25, I think. Anyway, it describes every place they went. And so they came back and gave the report that you remember. So, Joshua was one of those 12. So it seemed like, getting back to these verses here, it seemed like that the folks there, the king there, had a pretty good intelligence squad, or at least they knew who all went in and out of that prostitute's house. They knew that. However, we're going to find out they might have been pretty thorough, but they were pretty inept. For her to just send them on a wild goose chase, we'll see that it was a wild goose chase. You already know that because you've already read this a number of times, I'm sure, over the years. But so why do you think that Joshua just sent 2 spies and he sent them secretly? Now, when the other guys came back with Moses, they came back and they reported to everybody within hearing. But here it says he secretly sent out 2 spies. Why do you think that might have been?
Only 2 came back with a positive report the first time.
Okay, only 2 came back with a positive report, right?
Well, it's probably easier to get consensus from 2 instead of 12.
Okay.
That same thing.
Yeah.
Kept it secret better.
Hmm?
Kept it secret better.
Kept it secret better. Kept it secret better.
12 don't keep secrets very well.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true.
Also,
And
the places they're going.
What's that?
I said, even though they were found out, it's not as obvious. It's a lot harder to disguise 12 people than it is just a couple.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So a lot to consider there. Maybe also he sent them out secretly so they wouldn't come back and report to anybody but him, and he could discern their report and decide if is this report good or bad or in between or whatever. But with only 2 of them, as you said, it was a lot easier to keep it under wraps. And they would come back and only report to him. And then he could take that and discern what he thought of that report. So, we read along here, they're going to go and search out the land. So that first verse ends, they stopped at the house of a prostitute named Rahab and spent the night there. Is that a little surprising? I think it's a little surprising. Now, okay.
It's surprising in both accounts why they would choose that and why the king would assume that's where they are.
Yeah. Do any of you have some footnotes that say that instead of prostitutes, you could use the word Yeah, you could use the word innkeeper. It could be translated that way. However, I checked a number of different translations, and they all say prostitute or harlot. So I believe it probably was that, all of them.
But it's also a big example how God can use anybody.
Yeah, that's right. You are exactly right. We're going to see that he did use her very greatly through history, in fact. Yes, sir, Rick.
Yeah, I think too, it was a good place to not draw suspicion for them, because people will come and go, and so them coming would also give them a little bit of cover. And as James said, by the providence of God, he wanted Rahab saved.
Yeah.
So he came.
That's right. Now notice also that I'm sure you did, but notice also that she lied. Lying is really not justified at any time, but God used those lies to protect those 2 fellas, and also to turn what could have been a not so great situation into a really good one. So God, as James said, God uses people regardless. But you got to kind of wonder about those 2 guys, and then you kind of got to wonder about this king and his intelligence crew. Sound like they might have been misnamed as an intelligence crew, making me a lack of intelligence crew. However, I told you that I checked those words in the King James, the New King James, New American Standard, the English Standard Version, the ESV, the NET, the NIV, the RSV, and several others. And they all either used harlot or prostitute. So I would say that's probably what it was. However, it's going to turn out for good. We'll see about that. So, any other comments on those first 7 verses? Well, good. Let's move on. Verse 8. Let's look at verse 8. We're going to read down through verse 14. And it says, "Now before the spies went to sleep, Rahab went up to the roof. She said to the men, 'I know the Lord is handing this land over to you. We are absolutely terrified of you, and all who live in the land are cringing before you. For we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you left Egypt, and how you annihilated the 2 Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, on the other side of the Jordan. When we heard the news, we lost our courage, and no one could even breathe for fear of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. So now promise me this with an oath sworn in the Lord's name. Because I have shown allegiance to you, show allegiance to my family. give me a solemn pledge that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and will rescue them from death." The men said to her, "If you die, may we die too. If you do not report what we've been up to, then we will show unswerving allegiance to you when the Lord hands the land over to us." So while we can't know exactly what happened there, we know that this was the house of a prostitute. They went there. They were reported, having been there, reported it to the king. We don't know exactly what happened there, but we know one thing that did happen there, and that was Rahab used that time very wisely. And what was, I wrote down a question for y'all. What was her confession and knowledge and request regarding Israel? What all did she say there about Israel in those verses that we read? Y'all have to talk louder.
She knew God had already delivered his people. He had dried up the sea for them. He had led the battle with the giant kings, and they won. So they already knew he was Lord of all.
Yeah, and think about how long ago that was when they dried up the Red Sea. It was over, at this point, it's something over 40 years. Now, I don't know how old Rahab was, if she just got told about it later or what, but those people knew about the Red Sea being opened up and them coming across on dry land. And so did she say we were a little bit worried about y'all? How did she put it? Terrified. And in mine it says, and cringing. And cringing. So they were terrified and cringing. They had heard about the crossing. They knew the defeat of those two kings, Sihon and Og. That just for kicks, do you remember where those guys were kings when they whooped them? It says they give you a hint. It's on the other side of the Jordan. It's where 3 tribes, or at least 2.5 tribes, are going to stay there. They were in that particular land, and they came in and whooped them. And so then they allowed Reuben, Gad, or they're going to allow Reuben, Gad, and a half tribe of Manasseh to settle there. And so then what did she say? Now, you got part of that I like. I was hoping you'd expand that a little bit, Stephanie, but when it said she knew about the Red Sea, but when she said here, let's see, let me find that exact. Which one? 10?
I say no. Yeah, I think what you're going for is probably verse 11.
Yeah.
You're right, it does start. It kind of builds.
Well, actually, I was talking about verse 9. But yeah, there's good stuff. Well, no, you weren't wrong, because we'll get to all those too. But when she said, with all confidence, I know the Lord is handing this land over to you. You know, and God gives those promises during this time when they are conquering this land, and they're going up against folks. A lot of times God used that very wording. I have already defeated these people for you. I have defeated them for you. And she said, I know the Lord is handing this land over to you. And we're absolutely terrified. We're cringing. And so then what? So what did she say to confess her faith? Which verse did y'all say?
11.
Okay, verse 11. Okay, when we heard the news, we lost our courage. And then the end of verse 11, for the Lord, and which that's Yahweh, the way that's written, that usually suggests that it was Yahweh, all caps on Lord. For the Lord, or Yahweh, your God, is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now mine has an exclamation point, but you remember that they didn't really have, when they wrote these things, they didn't really have any punctuation marks or anything like that. But I think whoever put the punctuation mark on that and put a exclamation point, I believe got that right. So she has confessed. To me, that's as strong as when we would say that we have invited the Lord into our heart, when we have made a confession of faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. She has made a confession of faith into Yahweh. And so what did she ask him to do?
Save her family.
Save her family.
And her.
Yeah, and her, yeah, her and all of her family. And let's see. So what did the men say in verse 14?
Don't sound like they agreed with it all.
Yeah,
Said, we'll be kind to you and faithful, but don't mention her family.
well, I think you have to, since she asked for that with her family, lose
Well, yeah,
my
because it
ring off
says,
my finger.
our lives for your lives, and it says plural, so that would be
Yeah,
more
that'd
than
be
just
plural,
her.
so that would be our lives for your lives. But it kind of understood when she asked for to be save all of her family, and they agreed that they would do that. And they're going to agree again because they're going to put some more attachments to this contract. Okay, any other okay, I got some other. Most of you, I want to look at some other scriptures with you. Go over to Matthew chapter 1. Some of you already were mentioning a little bit having to do with this, but a lot of you are familiar with the story of Rahab. And she was an unlikely heroine. Very unlikely. She was not an Israelite. But she was famously included in with two other unlikely heroines who became Israelite by marriage. And one of them, you probably think of her name. She has a little book named after her, Ruth. And the other one is Tamar, is the other one. So all three of those, neither one of those three was an Israelite, but they became Israelite by marriage. And then if you go over to Matthew chapter 1, if you're in that, look at, let's see, verse 3. Tamar was the mother of Perez by Judah. And if you go on down that, you all know where that's going to end there, in the genealogy of Jesus. I just wanted you to see it. And then look at verse 5. Rahab was the wife of Salmon and the mother of Boaz, verse 5, who married Ruth, in verse 5, who begat Obed. And then in verse 6, you see that there was a relation between Obed and King David. And what was that relationship? Look at it closely. It wasn't a father, but it was his grandfather. Yeah, and then it goes on down. But these three women, non-Israelite women, God used. One of them was a prostitute, a harlot. But God used those women in the genealogy to give us, I guess, the idea that, not just the idea, to show us that God can use anybody and will use anybody who is willing to be used by him in his overall purpose for all of us. Any other comments? Oh, I was going to mention a couple of other verses and let y'all look at those. I just noticed in my notes. She was commended by her faith in chapter 11 of Hebrews, 11:31. Anybody got that handy? And somebody else look at James 2:25. Somebody look up James 2:25 while a couple of you are looking at Hebrews 11:31. That chapter 11 of Hebrews is, I forgot what a lot of times they'll call it the faith chapter or something. For me, I always call it the Faith Hall of Fame. They've got all those folks listed in there. Rahab was listed in that in verse 31. Her name was listed. You got that?
Well, I had the book of James, I forgot the rest of it.
Okay. You have 11:31? Read 11:31, real loud, Carol.
By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not filled with those who were disobedient.
Okay, very good. And then James 2:25, Susan, real loud.
In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction?
Right. James, you'll remember, liked to connect faith and action, faith and works. And he, in mine, I think, was she not commended by her works, but that was works due to her faith. And so James was good about that. There's a different James than this one here.
Yeah.
But similar in their faith. Similar in their faith. Both giants in their faith. Okay. So, any other comments about Rahab or what's going on up through verse 14?
I just think she, well, like you say, that her faith shows through her action how courageous she was.
Yeah.
And she fully believed, I think, that God would protect her if she protected his people.
Yeah.
And I think that's why she was so bold to do that, because, like you say, who is she to say, to one as a woman, to request something from men like that, but then also from just who she was as a woman, as a prostitute, double down on that.
Yeah, that's true. I guess she thought, this is my best shot at it. I got these guys that came to my place. I'm going to talk to them. And she did. Well, God gave her the courage to do that. God gave her the courage, and she stepped out in faith, basically, and said, looky here. You've got all of us terrified, and we've been terrified for years, but when we saw you coming here, we became really terrified. And so, please save my family. Please save my family.
Yeah, not just her, but her family. She was a leader for her family, really.
Yeah, that's right. She was the leader of her family. All right, let's see how they were to do that. Look at verse 15. We'll go down through the end of the chapter. I think we'll probably get out of here a little bit earlier than we normally do. We're not going to go into the next chapter because we couldn't get all the way through it. I hate going through just part of it. So look at verse 15. We'll read from there. Then Rahab let them down by a rope through the window. Her house was built as part of the city wall. She lived in the wall. She told them, head to the hill country so the ones chasing you don't find you. Hide from them for 3 days, long enough for those chasing you to return. Then you can be on your way. The men said to her, we are not bound by this oath you made us swear unless the following conditions are met. When we invade the land, tie this red rope in the window through which you let us down, and gather together in your house your father, mother, brothers, and all who live in your father's house. Anyone who leaves your house will be responsible for his own death. We are innocent in that case. But if anyone with you in the house is harmed, we will be responsible. If you should report what we've been up to, we are not bound by this oath that you made us swear. She said, I agree to those conditions. I bet she wholeheartedly agreed on those conditions and probably jumped right on that. So she sent them on their way and then tied the red rope in the window. They went to the hill country and stayed there for 3 days, just like she said to them, long enough for those chasing them to return. And their pursuers looked all along the way, but did not find them. Then the 2 men returned. They came down from the hills, crossed the river, that'd be the Jordan, came to Joshua, son of Nun, and reported to him all they had discovered. They told Joshua, surely the Lord is handing over the land to us. All who live in the land are cringing before us. So a really good report. He got that report just to him. As we mentioned before, there was only 2 of them, and boy, they agreed wholeheartedly. Of course, they agreed because God set this up with Rahab to become an Israelite at heart, and later to marry this fellow by the name of, anybody remember who we read a while ago? It's a fish. Salmon. Yeah. But I don't know how you pronounced it. Probably not like that. But it's spelled just like the fish. And so she later became an Israelite. But God used her greatly that day. But she made basically what I would say is a profession of faith at that point. So how did they escape?
Down a rope over the wall.
Hmm?
Down a rope over the wall.
Yeah, through a window.
Yeah,
Down a rope. Does you remember anybody else that got rescued? Paul. And okay, a little more trivia. Where was that? Where did that take place? Well, where was he headed when he was on the road someplace when he found salvation? Damascus. Yeah, and so he went on to Damascus, and the guy had to come to him, and pray with him, and his eyes were open. Basically, the stuff on his eyes fell off or something, scales on his eyes or whatever. And so I'm looking over this way all the time. I'm ignoring you guys, so let me look this way for a while. Paul, I think, was lowered down in a basket, if I remember the way it read. However, these guys, she helped them get down by way of a rope. And you understood that part, that her house was on the wall, was part of the wall. And so then what was the signal that she was supposed to? Okay. A red rope. Does that remind you of anything? Right, the Passover. So how was that? How would that remind you of the Passover?
They were told to put the blood of the lamb over their doorway.
That red blood of the lamb over the doorway.
And that would be the sign of their protection for them to be protected from the death of the firstborn.
Exactly. And so they were to put this red rope tied off to something, I guess, and have it hanging out so that they would be able to see it. And there were conditions. The conditions were what?
Don't tell on them. Don't tell on them.
Don't tell on them partly, but
Stay in the house.
you got to stay in the house. When we start our attack, anybody that's not in that house, we're not responsible for their death. If they stay in there and they get killed, we'll take responsibility. I don't know what they'd do. They'd probably call Thomas J. Henry anyway. No, that was part of the deal. They had to be sure and stay in there, and I think we'll read later and see that they did. But anyway, a really great, I hate to use the word story because then that makes it sound like it's not true, but a really great event in the history of the church, before the church was known as the church, really. A great event in the history. The using of Rahab, the fact that she was a prostitute, the red rope, all of these things just play into the overall story of the history of Israel. So any other comments on any of this? Yes, sir. Jerry?
Is there any indication when you look at the history and the societies then, did they think the same thing about a prostitute as we would today, or would they be a little bit different in their society?
My guess is, that's known as the oldest profession. And for a reason. It's been around for forever, I guess. But I don't know. I think they would have been looked down upon at any time. However, Tamar, do you remember, we mentioned Tamar, do you remember anything about her?
Yeah, she was smarter than her father-in-law.
She was what?
She was smarter than her father-in-law.
Yeah, and who was her father-in-law?
Wait, Reuben?
Judah.
Judah.
Yeah, Judah, one of the 12. One of the 12. And he came into town and thought she was a prostitute, and a few months later he finds out that she is with child. But look how God used Tamar. Same thing. God so greatly. Yes, sir, Rick.
There's also an account by archaeologists that say that Jericho, as they examined the walls, all of them fallen, but one section of about 8 feet tall was still standing.
Wow.
So possibly that being proof of that
Wow.
area that she had found.
That's very interesting. There wasn't still a red rope there, was there? I guess over time that would deteriorate. All right, so any other comments or observations or anything else? Okay, well, we'll sort of begin to close out. Paul, who did we have listening in to us from, who was live streaming this?
Okay, let's see, Marcy Simmons,
Okay.
Janet Holt, Diane Sims, Billy Evans was,
Who?
Bill Evans.
Okay.
George, sorry. George. Yeah.
Who?
It comes up as Billy Evans.
George. Okay, George Owens. I thought you said somebody else, and I was trying to figure out. Okay.
That's what pops up on his Facebook.
Well, hello, George. We are so glad that you're doing better.
George Evans.
Evans.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Owens.
George Evans. We're so glad that you tuned in, and James was telling us that we're doing a whole lot better right now, so we're glad about that. We appreciate all of you that tuned in on your live stream, and we're going to depart from you now, and we're going to go into a time of prayer here, take prayer requests, but we'll let you folks go at home, and so Paul, cut us off.